What is up, guys? Well, last night we got episode 3 of The Last of Us Season 2 and an episode titled The Path. And I gotta be honest with you, I have some very mixed emotions on this episode. You know, I am somebody that has loved the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of what we've gotten out of this show, especially in Season 1, and quite a bit about what we've got so far in Season 2. But this is the first time that I stopped watching an episode and I went, I don't know if that completely worked for me. I don't know if I completely agree with the decisions that they're doing here, and I'm starting to get a little bit concerned. So if this is the first time you guys are joining me for a Last of Us video, I'm going to talk about the show specifically for the first section, and then eventually I'll go into another form of spoiler section where I talk more about the events of the video game, which obviously would spoil future events for those of you that are only following the show. So just keep in mind both of those sections depending on which type of viewer you are. But we are going to full-on spoiler explore this episode from top to bottom, left to right. And this is basically an aftermath episode. This is all about how everybody, the town, certain people are reacting to not only the siege, the attack on Jackson with all of the infected in the horde, but more specifically with the murder of Joel. And I do think that to an extent it was necessary to explore that story, maybe a little bit more than in the video game. In the video game, you pretty much just get a little segment where Ellie is kind of the one in mourning and having a little bit of a point of contention with Tommy and Maria about what to do about this, where she's much more vengeful. They're a little bit more trying to be a little more level-headed about it. And then very quickly we pick up with Ellie and Dina on their way to Seattle. So there's a lot. The vast majority of this episode is completely new storyline, completely new elements that are exclusive to the show. And there's, I think a necessity to exploring out the grief side of things a little bit more, but also some of the ways that they decided to do it, I wasn't completely on board for, and we'll get into all of that. But the episode starts off with what I think is one of the more powerful scenes in this episode, which is Tommy seeing the dead body of his brother Joel, just lifting off the sheet, looking at him. At first, he seems very collected and very calm, but then starts to get very emotional to him, to seeing that, and then him ending it with the line of, "Give Sarah my love." Definitely, a knife, a dagger to the heart for those of us that love Joel and love that storyline. And, we're very emotional about the way that the first season and the game opened up. So I thought that was fantastic to see Tommy have that reaction, given he was not there. He was not present for when his brother was killed in the show like he was in the game. And then we pick up with Ellie, who is in the hospital. She's got tubes in her. Presumably you would think she's probably got some internal bleeding or some broken ribs from them kicking her in the stomach. And she basically comes back to consciousness and just starts screaming, just picks up immediately from the emotional state that she was in before she lost consciousness. And again, another scene where I just will never understand the Bella Ramsey haters. I will never understand those that think that she's doing a terrible job or that she's not a good actress, whatever. This scene in and of itself, I thought was an incredible showcase of her acting ability. And then we get the title sequence, which for the first time at the very end of it, where it shows like the two little spores that come up that represent Joel and Ellie. Joel is no longer there, which just, even that detail is just like, oh God, the emotions. Then we pick up 3 months later, and I actually audibly said to my wife, I was like, 3 months later? Wow. And she goes, why? And I said, well, they didn't do that in the game. It's like the next day. Which makes sense in the context of the show, specifically because of the attack on the actual town. They need to explore how the town is rebuilding, and there's much more to react to and much more to explore kind of the grief and the reactions and the aftermath of than just Joel's death here. So that made sense to me, and also showing kind of a little bit more of a realistic look at how long it would take Ellie to build herself back up, to heal up from the attack, and to get herself ready to actually go on this journey. In a video game, you just kind of accept it. You're like, whatever, man. I'm dying and I'm taking bullets and I'm healing by putting bandages on me. The realities are very different. So I think that was also a necessary change for the show. And I liked the scene where you have Ellie in the hospital basically going through her outpatient procedure where she's given, the levels of pain and stuff. And before she leaves, she's forced to have one conversation with Catherine O'Hara. And I'm very curious of what her ultimate point and place in this show is going to be. Like, it seemed very necessary to get a little bit of the exposition out from Joel and to explore that in episode 1, but I'm very curious what her ultimate piece of this story is going to be, because seemingly she's going to have some role in either uncovering what Joel did or something in regard to Ellie. It doesn't feel like she's just going to be a character who's there because we love Catherine O'Hara. So the fact that we had a conversation with her was interesting because it was something that really focused on and put a spotlight on how well and how gung-ho Ellie will be about faking her being normal and faking her being okay and not being an emotional wreck that's driven by like this bloodthirsty revenge. So she's very much just kind of being a smartass, as she always is, but giving Catherine O'Hara all the answers that she needs to hear to just let her go about her day. And I loved the shot where she's walking out of her room and she's got kind of that content look on her face, and it very subtly and slowly turns into this very dark look, where that just kind of, again, subtle acting from Bella Ramsey to give everything that we need to know about Ellie's mental state 3 months later, which is her going to pretend and say what she needs to say to get people on board with her mission, but she is out for blood. The one thing that she is focusing on right now is, I'm going to fucking kill every single one of these assholes. And I loved that shot. Then we get her going to Joel's house, which was certainly a segment from the game that I thought would have been imperative for them to have here, and I'm glad that they did, where it's this very calm before the storm element in the game, where after Joel's death, Ellie goes to his house. You see the flowers and the memorial of the town kind of paying respects to Joel, and she goes in and starts to see all of his stuff has been packed up, and she finds the box with his watch, which an interesting detail that I saw somebody bring up, which I don't even know if I ever really realized or if that's been confirmed somewhere, but his watch has been broken and almost looks like a bullet hole. And somebody says, fun fact, that watch has been broken since the time that his daughter was shot. Like, I don't know, maybe a bullet hit it or something like that. And if that's the case, I love that detail. And I don't know how I never picked up on that, because basically he's wearing this watch as a memorial for the moment that he lost his daughter and kind of lost himself in a lot of ways until he found Ellie. So you get to see that watch. She pulls back the cloth and gets his revolver, which is something that happens in the game and is one of the, your main weapons. And then you get the scene where she goes and she kind of embraces his jacket. And, it's kind of similar to Brokeback Mountain when Heath Ledger is grabbing Jake Gyllenhaal's jacket. And it's like the scent of the jacket, like, just overwhelms her with emotion. And another great moment of acting. Great expression of grief from Bella Ramsey. So everything up to this point, I'm totally on board for. I'm like, hell yes, this is necessary. This is great. This is emotional. I'm digging all of this. And a slight change, instead of her having this little bit of a meeting downstairs at the kitchen table with Maria and Tommy, it's now just Dina. Dina's down there, and she kind of has this peace offering, these box of cookies, because she says, I'm about to tell you something that's going to make you very angry. So this is kind of like a buffer for that. And she tells Ellie that, despite all the times seeing her in the hospital, which she apparently visited her very frequently, she withheld the information that she knows a lot more about Joel's killers than she ever let on. She knows all of their names. She knows the number of them. She knows where they're going. And Ellie is initially very pissed off about this, but very quickly gets over it, because now she has all the information that she needs to go and do what she wants to do. She knows all their names. She knows a little bit about what the WLF is and the symbol of the wolf, and she knows that they are probably in Seattle. And at this point, I love Dina's justification of this, which is not only just like, hey, like, you would have pulled the tubes out of yourself and started crawling to Seattle, so I did this for your own good, but even more so, she said, I thought it would be better if we're going to go find somebody in their home base, you might as well give them the time to get there, because she knows, like, they're all just walking through the woods. They don't have a horse or anything like that. So I liked that. And that was a change from the game that I thought was a good little scene. And continuing to be a lot of great stuff from Isabella Merced as Dina. And we're going to get even more into that with this episode. And I like the scene, again, a kind of a different, similar dialogue, but a different exchange where they essentially confront Tommy. And even more so Ellie, where she's making it very clear, I want to go do this. I want to go and hunt these people down, and I don't know why the fuck you're not 2 months ahead of me right now. And I liked Tommy's response. Their approach to Tommy so far is very different than the game. And I have some concerns about that I'll get into a little later. But one thing that I do like is that he very much has this mature leader and father approach where he's trying to be as level-headed as possible. And I like where she's confronting him saying, if it was you, Joel would be already halfway to Seattle, and says, no, he wouldn't. He would be running away right now, guilt-ridden. He would be hiding from all of this. Don't act like I don't know my brother. I like that moment where it's just like, you like to think that Ellie knows him better than everybody else, but it's like, oh yeah, Tommy knew him for 40 plus years before the events of the TV series and the game even started. And they had a whole lot of time with each other in that 20 years between when the pandemic started and when we pick up 20 years later where he's on his own as a smuggler with Tess. And so it really does kind of, it reintroduces that whole element of, oh yeah, Tommy knows Joel better than anybody in this entire world. And so I really liked that little change in the dialogue there. And rather than in the game where he says, look, I have to go talk to Maria, because in the game, Maria's the leader. She's the one that makes all the decisions. He says, we have to have a town hall. We have to have a meeting about this. If you want to put a posse together, we have to do it the right way. We can't just go rogue and act like the town is, we can do whatever we want with the town's resources and the town's people. And him as a leader, that makes sense. And so you essentially have that, and then Ellie starts training physically with Jesse. I don't know how long she's been doing it, but she's starting to have a lot of hand-to-hand combat training, which is going to come in handy if they're going to visualize at all how Ellie is in the game. And a little bit more interaction with Jesse, who is now a part of the council. He's one of the town leaders. And I liked the moment where he's very much like Tommy, trying to hold on to his leadership responsibilities while trying to give her a gentle nudge in the direction that she needs to be, where he tells her, you can't be Ellie. You can't walk into this town hall and just be you and expect people to be on board with it. Like, you have to prepare your thoughts. You might want to write it down. And she takes that, and kind of following up the scene that she has with Catherine O'Hara, she takes that as a kind of an invite and a bit of a nudge to be the fake Ellie, be the one who seems collected and seems all put together. And so you eventually do get this town hall meeting. And, you know, this is where I started to get really mixed and concerned on the episode overall, because at this point, like, we're halfway through the episode, and I'm like, man, are we really going to spend an entire episode just in aftermath mode and just kind of in a lot of this exposition and this connective tissue, when in the game we were in Seattle like that, and I never really called into question anything that happened in between his death in Seattle? Like, is it necessary to spend this much screen time, an entire episode on all of this? We'll see. But this is the point where I started to get a bit concerned, because this town hall meeting, there was things about it that I liked, and there was things about it that didn't completely work for me. On one end, I mean, it was realistic in how a town hall would be, where they're there to talk about, hey, do we get people together to go and execute these people in Seattle? And you got one guy sitting there waxing away about corn and how difficult corn is, but how quick it is to produce. And they're like, do we have more important things to get to? And he's like, oh, I don't really have an opinion on that. Like, I kind of like that, but again, that's where it started to feel like filler. Like, do we need this? No. And so eventually you do get the town hall where they open it up, and the one person that talks basically gives sympathies but says, hey, we can't afford to let some of our best people go in case something else happens here. Like, we need to focus on the good of the town, not just satisfying your emotions about one person who was killed, when dozens, I guess, were killed in this raid, which I still stick to my criticism, my one criticism of the last episode, which is we should have seen more townspeople die to convey how devastating this was. It was pretty much just focused on the action of killing all of the infected. So I didn't really get a huge grasp on how devastating of a loss this was for the actual town, aside from just property damage. But nonetheless, very sensible thing for somebody to say. But of course, all of our main characters emotionally are not accepting of that, most so Ellie. And so they give Seth comes in. This is the guy who was like the homophobic guy in the first episode that, you know, said the slur to Dina and Ellie when they kissed on the dance floor. And he basically stands up and calls bullshit on everything, and calls basically the entire town a bunch of pussies. And he's like, we need to fuck these people up or they will come back. And they will come back laughing, because we just let them do this and we just sat here with our tail between our legs and allowed it to happen. And I really liked that moment, because it gives that character a lot more than he ever had in the game. Also, I like that actor. You know, he was in Stephen King's Thinner. He was in Rescue Me. But I like the fact that we got both approaches. We got the kind of, sensible approach, and we got the fuck this, we need to go wreck shit approach. And then you have Ellie, who now has to give a speech, and she has to decide, which side am I going to appeal to? Am I going to appeal to the sensible side? Am I going to appeal to the emotional side? And it kind of just reinforced how bad of a liar she is, really, where she gives this speech that anybody who watches the show or especially plays the video game, like, this is the first moment where it feels like that's not Ellie. Ellie wouldn't say that, and it's because it's not her. It's her writing basically the opposite of how she feels in an effort to try to appeal to more people and not be kind of the more outcast person that she usually is. And it doesn't work. She goes in this huge speech about it's not about vengeance, it's about justice, which is a lie. And, tries to appeal to people about her and how she'll be there for everybody else, which I don't even know if that is completely truthful. She's very much somebody who's there for the select few people she really loves. And they put it to a vote, and only 3 people vote yes. And I presume that was Tommy, Maria, and Jesse. We don't get to see who the votes are. Maybe at some point they'll say that. It doesn't seem like it, but that was kind of how I added things up. It was 3 versus 8. The town said no. And you can just read it on Ellie's face where she's like, all right, doing this shit myself, I guess. And so, for that entire sequence, that was the one segment of the episode where I was just like, do we really need all of that? Like, I don't dislike some of the things that are there. I understand some of the complaints that I've heard from friends and everything about that segment, but to me, it was just like, is this necessary? Do we need a whole episode on this with only 7 episodes in this season? So after the town hall, you have the episode really starts to pick back up for me again, where Ellie is in her room and she is gearing up and she's got all this hardware that she's getting ready to go out on this one-man killing spree. And I loved the exchange again here where Dina shows up and knocks on the door and Ellie's like, I'm getting ready to go to bed. And Dina's like, the fuck you are, open this door. So that was great. And I liked how you get the very emotionally driven Ellie, who's just like rushing through, trying to get out of there as fast as possible and get on the road to Seattle. And you have Dina that comes in with all of the actual planning and thinking that's necessary to do this right, where she has a map. She has a list of supplies in her head that they need for medical reasons to make sure that they actually survive all the way there. And I like how she comes in and just immediately her dialogue is as if they're both been planning to do this from the beginning. Like, doesn't even ask Ellie, like, hey, can I come along? Do you want me to come along? Or forces her way in. She just comes in and just decides. She's just like, yeah, we need this. We're doing this. Here's the map. We need some medical supplies. And I love that. I love that take control aspect to her. I adore what Isabella Merced is doing with this character in the show. Like, I like the character a lot in the game. I think the character's even better so far in season 2 of the show, only 3 episodes in. And a lot of that is just that charm, some of that wit, and some of that piss and vinegar that is very, again, charming in a way that Isabella Merced is bringing, and her chemistry with Bella Ramsey. So we have that whole exchange, and she says, I've got somebody that's helping us. It's not Jesse, don't worry. And I had thought for a second it was going to be Tommy, because their utilization of Tommy has been very different so far. And so I figured, okay, maybe it's going to be Tommy saying, I can't exactly leave because I'm not in a position to, but go get these motherfuckers. That's what I thought was going to happen. But they get to the gate, and it's Seth. It's the guy that made the homophobic slur to them that Ellie despises and is giving zero room for forgiveness there, even when he tries to give them the sandwiches and tries to apologize. And so I actually really liked that because, again, it's giving this character more than he ever had in the game, and that's interesting to me. So I like how he comes up, immediately just hands her a rifle, and he's like, take mine, mine's better. And reluctantly she does, gives him the horse, tells them like, hey, we got the horse from, I guess, his wife. She's like, she's sympathetic to our cause. And she says, we? And he's like, look, you're the one that said we, not me, when she had a little town hall thing. And they have this handshake that didn't feel like I forgive you, but it feels like this mutual thing of like, we don't have to like each other, but we have the same goal in mind, and we have some of the same mentality. So good luck. And what I liked about that, and why I do feel like that is something that's a nice little addition from the game, is because it starts to really reinforce the overall theme of the story of the second game, which is not only vengeance, but forgiveness and how those two are at odds with each other. And so this is the beginning of Ellie put in a position where it's best to forgive and, kind of start to plant the seeds of where maybe they'll take her character, depending on how faithful this is to the game. And there's a lot of changes so far, so who knows? At some point in all of this, too, we get our introductions to the Scars, or the Seraphites, who are the people who look like a cult, because they are. And it's basically a group of them walking through the woods, and they have a father and a young daughter. And not only does it introduce the look of them, but also you get a little bit of backstory to the prophet, who is this woman who started the Seraphites. And the dad is explaining to a daughter what a prophet is. And then you get the introduction of the whistles, which is how the Seraphites communicate in battle, but especially in travel, where just variations of whistles is how they speak so that their enemies don't understand what they're saying to each other. And I thought that was very cool. My concern, though, is that, they end this sequence by them panicking because they find out that the wolves are coming, the WLF, the Washington Liberation Front. And so they start to hide. The dad and the daughter are sitting there and they're like, who is it? What's going on? He goes, it's wolves. And then we cut away from that. And I'll get back to what my concern is, because I think it was later on in the episode. But essentially you have Dina and Ellie now on the way to Seattle. And I've seen some people complain that they got to Seattle way too quick in the show, and I could not disagree more. If anything, I think they should have got to Seattle faster. I don't think we need to have a real-time Game of Thrones level exploration of how long it would take for them to horseback from Jackson to Seattle. That would be half a fucking season at best. So I did not have a problem with them montaging some of that at all. And some beautiful shots, too, of like the American countryside. And then you get this scene where they're in this tent. And this tent scene is kind of a replacement for a scene that we did not get that I discussed in the second episode's review, where you had Ellie and Jesse inside of Eugene's like weed farm in the 7-Eleven. And in the video game, that was Ellie and Dina after their little run-in in that grocery store. And this is where you really start to solidify that they are in a relationship, or they at least have an infatuation with each other in the video game. So we didn't get that. And so this is kind of the replacement for that, where they have a very similar exchange where Dina, flirtation-wise, asks her to rate the kiss. And Ellie gives a very blunt answer of like 6 out of 10 or something like that. And so this scene, I was kind of mixed on it, because I do think it was done better in the game. But I understand they're just taking a different approach in the show, and I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that I'll eventually like where they take this. Because in the game, it was very clear right away that Ellie and Dina are a thing. And there's not a ton of build up to that. And in the show, it seems like they're deliberately trying to build up to that a lot slower. They're trying to, introduce little flirtations and little things where Dina is a lot more forward, Ellie's a lot more reserved, maybe not having a lot of self-confidence, or maybe just being a bit walled off because of her love for her friend that died in the first season, the one where she got bit, and maybe that's still kind of a cloud hanging over her. And so they're slowly building that out in the show. And so as long as they don't draw it out too much, I think that I'll appreciate that. But at the moment, I'm not sure. So the way that the tent scene went down, it was similar, but I think it was done a little bit better in the game, which, again, if you have not played the game, is not an issue for you whatsoever. But a fine scene where the biggest piece of significant information in this is that Dina tells Ellie that she got back together with Jesse, presumably during the 3 months that Ellie was in the hospital. And that's an important piece of information, because the Dina and Jesse relationship is kind of strange the way that it's fleshed out in the game. It's not really fleshed out at all. And so, again, something that in the show I feel like we're going to get a little bit more context to, and I'm all for that. But then we have Ellie and Dina eventually getting pretty close to Seattle. And one of the first things that they find is a bunch of people who have been slaughtered. And it's the Seraphites, the Scars that we were introduced to a little bit earlier. And the first one that they find is one who was clearly shot in the back when he was running away. And there's a lot of questions that are raised in this sequence. And it all is in relation to the WLF, who is the militia group that Abby and her group are a part of. And one of the main things that Abby said whenever she was getting ready to kill Joel is, we have a code, and it's you never kill somebody who can't defend themselves. Well, that one thing right there completely contradicts that. And so it starts to get your wheels turning as a viewer going, okay, is Abby full of shit? Or are there like rogue people within the WLF? Or are they all a bunch of fucking psychos? And this is the main part of the episode that I had the most issue with, is what they did to introduce the Scars, to introduce the WLF. I think what was effective is that it really starts to, like, even just the look on Ellie's face is like, holy shit, these are the people that we're going to be hunting down and dealing with. It establishes a very big threat. Even the scene of them marching, and there's just more and more and more of them going down the street of Seattle. That side of it, I think, was done well. My concern, which again is only from somebody who has played the video game, is that I feel like the information that they're giving us immediately about the Seraphites and the WLF, much like with Abby, I have concerns about them giving that information so early and not allowing certain things to play out the way that it does in the game. And I'll get a little bit more into that in the other spoiler section. But the Seraphites and the Wolves, that was the thing that I was like, that doesn't work for me yet. Like, maybe you have a better plan in mind, and I'll eventually get to that spot and say, okay, it's cool. But at the moment, that's the spot where I went, oh, hang on. You're sacrificing some very serious storyline here, and I don't know if I like that. And that's pretty much where the episode ends. I mean, you have Manny, who is up in the Space Needle, doing like a little sniper thing, and it shows, again, how big the WLF is, where he tells them they can continue, and there's just this huge march of people. And presumably in the next episode, I guess, is where we're going to get a lot of context for the WLF and Isaac, who is their leader, and their relationship with the Seraphites. You know, it already shows him torturing one of them and stuff like that. And then I'd assume we'd also get the first bit of chapter of Ellie and Dina in Seattle. So to kind of close out my thoughts on the episode overall without getting into the video game stuff, I'm a little concerned that 2 out of the 3 episodes that we have gotten so far are very slow burns. And I do think there's some good character stuff in here, but I think pacing-wise, this season has been incredibly sluggish so far. And I wouldn't be that worried about it. One, if I could watch the entire season, but watching it week to week, it's a little frustrating that you wait a week and then you get this episode, and now you have to wait another week. And it just feels like not a whole lot really happened. And a lot of people felt that way about the first episode after waiting years for that season to premiere. So I have concerns about just the ratings of this show in general, notwithstanding the big controversy with Joel's death that's going to drop a lot of people off. But the show just seems a little sluggish so far. And I think that we're about to hit a point where it's going to be off to the races for the next 4 episodes. But I don't know, because we still have a lot of flashback stuff to get to that's been shown in the previews. So I don't know what the pacing is going to look like. But so far, the pacing of this season, I think, is starting to be a really big concern for me, mostly with this episode. And overall, I just don't know if we needed an entire episode fleshing all of this out. I think that the eulogy nature of the episode is something that's interesting, and there are some things about it that they're changing from the games that I'm interested in seeing play out, and I like all of that. But just because it's a 7-episode season, especially, I have concerns about how much of this story we're actually going to get through by this season's end. Like, I don't know where we're going to end, how long it's going to take for season 3. Like, I just have a lot of concerns right now about the way that they are pacing out this segment of the story and how they're deciding to tell this, if they're not just going to have one big extended season, or if nothing else, have extended episodes. These have only been 50 or so minute episodes so far. And if you're going to do a 7-episode season, it feels like a lot of these episodes so far should have been an hour 15, an hour 30, some of them. And from what I've seen out there, I think the entire season is pretty much that way, where it's like 50 or so minute episodes. I don't think any of them are going to be really extended. And so I don't really think having another slow episode so close to the first episode that was slow, and not doing a whole lot as far as what's happening, and spending so much time on a segment of the game that was over like that, when we have so many other things to get to, it was an episode that really concerned me. And I know I've said that word a number of times. Like, I did not dislike this episode. I think that overall it was a good episode. But for as much as I love the majority of what we've gotten out of season 1 and so far season 2, I think it's safe to say this is my least favorite of the show so far. Now, again, high bar as far as like, so many episodes just being like damn near 10 out of 10 for me, which is rare. I loved basically everything in season 1 and season 2 so far. Last episode 2, I thought was one of the best episodes of TV ever, but the season premiere and episode 3 are in competition for my least favorite episodes of The Last of Us so far. And that's concerning that we've got 2 of those in the first 3 episodes of this season. So that's kind of where I'm at with this one. I'm still kind of trying to be cautiously optimistic, but I have a lot of concerns, and I'm going to have even more that I'm going to get into here in this next segment pertaining to the video game. So with that said, we're going to talk about changes from the game and some of my issues so far that's more spoilerific towards the game and future events. So one of the first thing, as I was kind of touching on here, is Dina and Ellie's relationship being a little bit slower. I do have concerns about, with the events of the game, if they draw it out too much, is it going to feel odd when we start to get into certain things when they're actually in Seattle? One of the big ones being that Dina is pregnant. And given that she throws up when they find the Seraphites, to me, that was a sign that they're absolutely keeping that storyline. Like, obviously, she can just throw up because it's pretty gnarly to look at and the smell and everything. But the way that she was reacting to it and the look on her face, it's very clear to me that she's still going to be pregnant in the show. And one thing that I did like is that extra little context of she got back with Jesse, and she has been with Jesse presumably for the 3 months that Ellie has been in the hospital. That gives a little more understanding to how she got pregnant by Jesse, and will hopefully be explored a little bit more. That was something that was kind of like a throwaway detail to a degree in the game, where we never really got anything as far as interaction between Jesse and Dina. And I'm hoping that's one thing that we'll get a little bit more of in the show, just for some added context. But a very big question mark on how that's being done so far. I understand taking a slower approach. I just hope it doesn't take too slow of an approach. And going along with that, I'm very curious on Jesse's further purpose in the story, where in the video game, he kind of shows up unannounced to help Ellie, where, Dina's laid up in this theater and she no longer has help, and he shows up right at the right moment to give her some aid. And I don't know if that lines up with this version of Jesse that we've been seeing so far, who's a lot more about his duty to the town than the more playful version of Jesse that we got in the video game. But maybe he knows that Dina's pregnant. Maybe her being gone with Ellie is what drives him to get there. That would make sense to me. So again, just kind of a question mark. Not that I'm like super concerned, but I'm just curious, like, how are things going to change here? Something that I'm not only curious, I'm very puzzled by is their utilization of Tommy so far in this show. Like, I understood in the second episode we needed Tommy to be in the town, and that was a nice trade-off to have Dina be there during Joel's killing and have Tommy be there to defend the town. I think that was a trade-off that was welcome, a change that was welcome from the video game. But the fact that he doesn't really seem that driven to go avenge Joel is odd to me. Like, I get his justification, and I like some of his dialogue in his justification, especially in kind of calling out Ellie. But the fact that the town hall going the way that it didn't have Tommy be motivated the way that he was in the game to just say fuck it and go off on his own. And so he's kind of a couple of days at least ahead of Ellie and Dina. I think that's going to be a little bit of an omission in this story that's going to be disappointing for me, because it was cool to find them, to have them find all these aftermath moments where Tommy has fucked up a lot of people and Tommy has gone brutal with a lot of people trying to get information. And they're basically following Tommy inadvertently all the way to Abby. And I'm bummed that seemingly is not going to be a part of this version of that story. I also don't know how he's eventually going to be a part of the story later on. I don't know if he replaces Jesse as the one that shows up to help Ellie. I don't know if him and Jesse come together. But Tommy being in Seattle and being a part of this fight is a major piece of the story in the video game. And so far, the show seems like it's doing everything it can to sideline that, or, at least approach it in a different way, which I have not seen yet. So that is a big thing where so far, like, I love what Gabriel Luna is doing and I love a lot of his dialogue, but I'm like, when are we going to get Tommy where he needs to be? Because I'm starting to get a little worried that you're seemingly continually pushing him to the side as if you don't want him to be that part of the story. And I don't know if I want the story without Tommy being a part of it. That's very important. And now moving on to the part of the episode that I was most unhappy with, most concerned with, that I really don't understand. And that is their introduction of the Scars and the Wolves. Now, in the video game, of course, you're introduced to the Wolves through Abby, and that's kind of the group that you're somewhat hunting down, even though it's very specific to Abby's group and, some NPCs that you follow along the way. It's not like a war on the Wolves, it's a war on Abby. But you're introduced to the WLF as just like another faction. They're like the Fireflies or anybody else, the Fedra that you deal with in the first game. They're not really, they're in your way, but it's not necessarily like they're this evil group of people. They're just, military, or there's some kind of government organization that doesn't fit with your worldview. And so they're, enemies as far as your perspective is. And it's only through Ellie that you also get introduced to the Scars in a segment where you're walking through the woods at night and you hear these little weird ominous whistles, and then you go to climb up over a rock and you hear this sharp whistle, and then you just get hit out of nowhere with an arrow. And then all of a sudden you have this fight sequence where you have these people with bow and arrows that communicate through whistles hunting you down, and that's your introduction to the Scars. And for a very long point in the game, through the rest of the story for the first half with Ellie and a long portion of the story with Abby, you have this perspective of the WLF are the more civilized. They're the ones that are, military, trying to have some form of order. When you get into Abby's segment and you start to learn about, the stadium and how there's all these different, they're really rebuilding community there. You're inclined to think that, the WLF might do some bad shit, but they're probably the ones that are more of the group that you would want to back, even though Abby is a part of it and we're inclined to not like her. And the Seraphites and the Scars seem like psychos right out of the bat. I mean, with multiple things that we see, it's like these people are fucked up and barbaric. And it's only through the second half of the story with Abby that you start to see that those two predisposed assumptions that you have about these two groups are very wrong. Where the Scars certainly are not innocent, but much like with the other factions I just listed, they just kind of have their own worldview, and as long as you don't fuck with them, they don't fuck with you. And so they're definitely weird and cultish, but they're just trying to live their life, and they're kind of giving up all the modern technology, pre or post-pandemic stuff. They're just kind of living in peace on this island, just wanting to exist. And the Wolves are the ones led by Isaac, at least some of the Wolves that are more barbaric, and they're the ones that are just going to take what they want, and they're going to murder people. They're going to find ways to, very politically pit people against the Scars. And so you have this huge change and this shift to how you view everything through Abby's relationship with Lev and so many other things. And in the show, I really don't like the fact that they have introduced us to both of these groups and made it very much like, oh, these Scars are just peaceful, innocent people that want to be left alone, and the Wolves are fucking monsters. Now, we don't have confirmation exactly that the Wolves are the ones that gun down the Scars. There could be some kind of reveal involved with that because it doesn't actually show it. But I don't know who the hell it would be if it's not the Scars, or if it's not the Wolves. I think it was just they were waiting to show Dina and Ellie's reaction, and that's why we didn't see what actually happened. You just see the aftermath. I don't think it was necessarily meant to have a gap there where there's a twist or a reveal, but it could be. But I really don't like the fact, just like how I didn't like, and I'm still concerned about how they gave you so much information about Abby right off the bat that takes away so much discovery and so much of a journey that you go through as a experience in this story. They take all that away to front load it. And I feel like they're doing the same thing here with the Scars and the Wolves. And they're making the Wolves the clear big bad, and they're making the Scars out to be these innocent victims. Now, we're obviously going to get some segments at some point that's going to challenge how innocent the Scars are, and they're going to seem barbaric in certain ways. And maybe they can turn me around on this. Maybe they have things in mind for why they decided to do that. But as somebody who has the information of the game working against me a lot when I watch this season, I really don't like how they did that. To me, it's like, why? I don't want to experience this story. I don't want other people to experience this story in a way that's different, where you automatically just know the Wolves are fucked up and Isaac's a bad guy, and Abby is a part of this because I haven't seen her at all, which is going to make people even harder against Abby and even less inclined to eventually sympathize with her. and the scars are now like these innocent people. Like I just did not like the way that they did that. So that's kind of my overall thoughts as far as the video game side of things. You know, again, an episode that I did not dislike, but I certainly didn't love it. There was a lot of things here that felt a bit meandering. I'm a little hesitant to call it fluff, or you know, a filler episode, because I do think there's some important things going on here character-wise, but I don't know if an entire episode should have been dedicated to so little story advancement when we have so much left to do and only 4 episodes to do it. So I'm concerned at this point. I'm still enjoying the show. I'm still being cautiously optimistic, but I'm concerned. So let me know what you guys' thoughts are down in the comment section below. Both of you are just a fan of the show as well as a fan of the video game. Are you concerned, or are you totally on board and you love everything that's going on? Let me know, and we'll talk about it. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a playlist up here of all of my Last of Us coverage, both Season 1 and Season 2, for you to check out. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.